Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode because we are going to be covering a topic that I talk about a lot, but I don't think it had a dedicated episode all of its own. So today we're going to be talking about the impact that minerals have on our hormones. And like I said, you've heard me reference this probably on the majority of the episodes of this podcast, but I went back the other day. I was trying to send someone that was kind of new to my world. I wanted to give them an episode that just talked specifically about minerals and how they impact the hormones and why it's important. And I couldn't find an episode that was just centered around that. And I was like, you know what? This is a great time to visit this topic, get an episode recorded, and that way I'll always have it for you guys to refer back to. So, very excited about this one. I'm going to try to not get into the nitty-gritty weeds and get too sciencey for you guys, but still help you to understand why this is important. So right out of the gate, one thing that we need to understand is that minerals and vitamins are two different things. The other thing that we need to understand is that minerals cannot be made by our body within our body. We have to consume minerals in our diet or through supplementation when it's necessary. We cannot make them on our own. It's something that we have to consume. Because of that, it can get really difficult to meet our body's needs with minerals because especially some of the minerals that we're going to talk about today, we're not going to talk about every single one, but we're going to highlight, I think, five of the big kind of heavy hitters. We, it can be hard to get those in your diet, especially if you don't consume a really health facing diet to begin with. Now, a lot of you guys that are here in my audience with me are already health conscious people, and you do your best to be healthy and make healthy choices. The majority of the time, you're not perfect. Nobody expects perfection around here, but you try your best. Hello, I'm in that boat with you. Anyway, even for those of us that live that type of lifestyle, because of the way that our foods and our lands have been farmed over and over and over for many, many years now, the nutritional content of our food is not the same as it was several years ago. Our food, a lot of it gets mineralized from the soil that it's growing in. And if it's growing in an area where the soil has become depleted, then the end product itself is not going to be as nutrient dense as maybe it was 100 years ago. So now, that's not to say that blueberries are not important. It's not to say that there's not value there. It absolutely is. I'm just sharing that to kind of give you a little bit of insight maybe into why we struggle in general to meet the mineral demands and needs of our body. Another thing to think about there is that unfortunately, in this day and time, we are living in a more like toxin heavy, metal burdened life and lifestyle than ever before. There's dyes and nasty chemicals and artificial this and artificial that in a lot of the things that we go to consume or put on our bodies, or that we even just come in contact with where we can't even control it. It's like in the air that we breathe. It's kind of forced upon us at the workplace because we can't control certain things at our workplace. And I don't say all of that to be like negative, although it is a negative. I don't say that to like bring anybody down, but I just share it for awareness to kind of explain how we've gotten here and what things really influence our mineral levels. Now, what I can tell you is from all of the work that I've done with clients, all of the different HTMA tests that I have interpreted, it's more common that people are depleted in these key minerals that we're going to talk about than having an excess. Um, and again, I think that comes back to all the things that we just talked about. It comes back to poor diet, high stress environment, because we burn through minerals when we're stressed, and a toxic environment. Our body just can't keep up with the toxic load that it's, around these days. And just knowing those things helps us to make the small changes and tweaks that we can in our life to help support these minerals. And then also just moving forward, focusing on controlling what we can control because we can't control everything. And stressing about trying to control everything is not going to do us any favors either. So, okay, let's get into the minerals that I want to talk about specifically today. So we are going to talk about calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. Those are your macro minerals. They are the first 4 minerals that you see on an HTMA test. They are the most important. They're the most abundant in the body. They have the most jobs in the body. And to just back up for a second, in case this is someone's very first episode and they're like, hold up, she keeps saying HTMA. What is that? What does that mean? HTMA stands for hair tissue mineral analysis. It is a test you can do at home. You clip the sample at home. It's of your hair. You send it off to the lab, and we are looking at your cells. We're looking at your mineral levels on a cellular level. We're looking at the inside of your cells, and it gives us so much information. It's truly my favorite functional test that exists. I love it. I'm obsessed. If you listen to the podcast long enough, you're going to hear me talk about it a whole lot. So those are the macro minerals. Then I do want to cover one micro mineral because I see imbalances with this one a lot in my clients, and I'll kind of explain why when we get there, and that's copper. So first up, let's talk about calcium. And I specifically for this episode want to focus on how it impacts your menstrual cycle. There's other things, that we can get into with these minerals, like where we get them in our food, what foods they're high in or in potent levels in, and other effects that they have on their body. This is absolutely not a comprehensive overview of these minerals. If we wanted to do that, I would probably need to do individual episodes on just one mineral and we could deep dive into it. I do that with my clients that join me in my Wellness with Vanda Club, which is the membership that follows clients that have worked with me or had testing with me. I have deep dive modules that explain each of these minerals and all the things, but that's too much for this one podcast episode. So to just kind of focus in on calcium, and one of the key things that it's responsible for, hormone related. And we also have to keep in mind that when we talk about hormones, we have to talk about fertility, because the whole point, the whole goal of our menstrual cycle is fertility. And that is applicable whether you're actively trying and wanting to become pregnant or not. So one of the key things that calcium helps with and is responsible for is helping to develop the placenta. Calcium can also really influence like headaches and migraines because of the balance between calcium and magnesium, which we're going to talk about magnesium next, but that's another big point of influence for it. Also really impacts our blood sugar regulation. Okay, then we're going to move on to magnesium. So magnesium is responsible for a ton of stuff in our body. We burn through magnesium really quickly when we're stressed. We need a lot of magnesium to meet these needs because there's over 300 different processes that it's responsible for. So we need a lot of it because we're using a lot of it. So some of the key things, it helps support the inflammatory response. It helps move like water and waste products through our system. It helps us with elimination, which is part of detox, which is very important for, our hormone levels. Part of that detox is our liver. So magnesium also works to help support liver function. It helps ensure that our reproductive organs are functioning optimally. And then it's a big one for addressing PMS symptoms or avoiding PMS symptoms. Then we've got our sodium. Sodium helps support the water balance in our body, so that impacts our blood pressure. There are studies that have been done that have found that adequate sodium levels pre-conception, so this is kind of pregnancy baby related, but adequate sodium levels prior to conception decrease poor prenatal outcomes. Very important if you're someone that, is looking to get pregnant, planning for future pregnancies. Um, Sufficient sodium levels also help decrease the risk of developing endometriosis, which, causes a lot of pain for people and then can also be tied definitely to infertility. And then also having sufficient sodium levels decreases the risk of PCOS occurrence. Okay, then we're going to hit potassium. Potassium is a wonderful mineral. I don't think it gets enough attention, so I try to give it a lot of attention. Um, it is one that I find to be chronically depleted in a lot of my clients, and my hypothesis is that part of that comes back to it's part of it's our stress, but the other part of that I truly believe is tied back to birth control and long-term birth control use. And again, that's just my own personal hypothesis based on the hundreds of HTMA tests that I have seen and client histories that I have reviewed along with it. But I digress. Some of the key things that potassium is responsible for is helping get hormones into our cells. So our thyroid hormone and our insulin specifically, it helps shuttle those into the cells. Sodium also kind of helps it with that because we have that sodium and potassium pump on each one of our cells. If you remember that, everybody just had a flashback to like middle school science class. But then it also, potassium, again, along with sodium, helps control the fluid balance in our body. So it can really impact blood pressure. And decreasing your risk of like stroke. It helps support good heart health. Um, and then again, it's a key mineral to address if you have insulin resistance. So those are our macro minerals. And again, those are the most important because they're the most abundant in the body. And, as I've talked through this list of like key things that it helps address, some of them are very obviously tied to your female sex hormones, which is what we talk about on this podcast. But then some of them, like when I talk about blood pressure and like your risk of stroke, you're like, well, okay, but what does that have to do with my period? We have to keep in mind that our hormones and our other body systems all have this trickle down effect on the symptoms we see in our menstrual cycle. So, like, we could also go back and talk about how calcium and magnesium affect period cramps. Because if there's an imbalance there, then our cramps are going to be worse. We could talk about how the balance between sodium and potassium can impact the amount of bloating that we have around and during our cycle. We could talk about the way that we have to have enough sodium to produce stomach acid, which helps us break down our food and absorb nutrients, which then kind of also gets back into the bloating. It could also impact the people, that have either constipation or diarrhea around the time of their cycle. Magnesium plays a part in that because a lot of times that diarrhea response is like from inflammation. So it's all interconnected. These four minerals also all have a key play in our thyroid health. And if we have poor thyroid health, then our body is not ovulating effectively and creating progesterone effectively, which impacts fertility in a big way and impacts our period symptoms in a big way. So then the last mineral that I wanted to talk on today was copper. And copper is one of the micro minerals. So it's not as important necessarily as the potassium, the magnesium, the sodium, the calcium. But I find that copper is a big, I don't want to say issue, but it's like a big consideration. That's a better word for a lot of my clients because we're looking at women that either have too much of it or not enough of it. And we really want a well-balanced copper level because it greatly impacts our energy and our mood. So, having sufficient copper really helps support healthy thyroid activity. And I just kind of talked through some of the reasons why our thyroid is an important part of our hormone symptoms and our fertility. And then with excess copper, if we get into a state where we have too much of it, this is where we can see some pretty significant symptoms that are really just kind of wiping you out. This can be like significant PMS, mood swings, increased anxiety, increased feelings of depression, negative like self-talk. High levels of copper can has also been linked to endometriosis development. It's been linked to infertility and implantation failure. So those are obviously big things that we want to make sure that we're addressing. And again, regardless of whether we're currently trying to get pregnant or not, because, we want to feel good in our body. We want to have sufficient energy to do what we want to do. We also we want to feel good. Like we want to be in a good mood. We don't want to be testy and on egg, on edge all the time and feeling anxious and just uneasy and snapping at the people that we love. Like that's not enjoyable for them or for you. So having a well-balanced copper really does help with that and impacts that. And that's why, again, one of the reasons that this is such a big deal and evaluating copper is such a big deal, or why I so commonly see it as something that needs to be addressed, is because birth control really impacts copper and it can go both ways. It can more often than not, it raises it or it kind of displaces copper where we actually kind of have too much of it, but it's not in a form that we can even use. And we've got to work on something called our iron recycling system that helps kind of mobilize some of this copper. And like this is the part where I get into the nitty-gritty sciencey weeds where I'm losing you guys. So I'm going to stop there. Just know that it's important. Okay. Know that it's one of my favorite minerals, one of my favorite things to address on an HTMA test, and definitely something that I would look at if you have some pretty significant PMS symptoms. So that's a quick summary, quick rundown of our minerals and why they're important, and some examples of how they impact our cycle. Trust me when I say I have not had a client yet who has ever gotten their HTMA test back and been like, yeah, I wish I hadn't spent the money on doing that. It was a waste. I didn't learn anything. I didn't know anything. I got the same information as I had before. I have never, and none of my colleagues that run them either, have probably ever heard that. HTMA testing is so valuable because of the amount of information that you get and the things that you learn about your own body and the dots that you're able to connect between like, oh, that makes sense why I feel this type of way or I have this symptom. So that's why I incorporate it with every single one of my period makeover solution clients. It's a key component of what we do inside that program. And very excited to continue offering that this year and have that as, part of my client experience. So if you are someone that is listening to the podcast and you're struggling with your period, you need help with your cramps, your heavy flow, your clotty periods, your PMS symptoms that are about to, wreck your whole household, then you're in the right place. And the best thing for you to do would be to book a Happy Hormones Clarity call with me. They're linked in the show notes. So that we can chat about what your next steps should be. I'll point you in the right direction. I'll give you some guidance. For a lot of you, that is going to be my period makeover solution program. And I can't wait to support you in there. I'm getting ready to enroll. Actually, I will have just started the day that this podcast episode airs. I'll have just started with a new group. So book yourself a call. Come have a chat with me and we'll talk all things hormones and what your next steps should be so that you also can have happy, balanced hormones with those pain-free, predictable periods. So hope you guys have a great rest of your week and I'll talk to you next week.